The Restless Arrow, Dhammapada Verses 33 to 34, The Architecture of Mind. Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to quiet your mind, the louder it seems to become? Perhaps you sat down hoping for a few moments of peace. You put aside your work, silenced your phone, closed your eyes, and imagined that stillness would naturally arrive. Instead, old conversations returned. Tomorrow's worries demanded attention. Forgotten embarrassments resurfaced without invitation. Even the smallest sound became an interruption. The mind seemed to run everywhere except the place where you wanted it to remain. More than 25 centuries ago, the Buddha recognized this same struggle. He did not see it as a personal weakness or a modern condition. He saw it as the ordinary movement of an untrained mind. Today's reflection begins with a monk who sincerely wished to meditate, but discovered that wanting peace and knowing peace are not the same. His experience reveals something deeply familiar. Often it is not the world that prevents quiet. It is the unnoticed habits of the mind itself. The Buddha's teaching is gentle. He does not ask us to fight our thoughts. He invites us to understand why they move as they do. In that understanding, something subtle begins to soften. Nothing outside has changed. Yet the experience of life starts to feel lighter because the mind is no longer pulling against itself. The Beautiful Grove. During one rainy season, the Buddha was staying on Kalika Mountain. Among the monks attending him was Thera Meghiya, earnest in practice and eager to deepen his understanding. One day, while returning from the alms round, Meghiya noticed a beautiful mango grove. Sunlight filtered through broad green leaves. A gentle breeze stirred the branches, and the quiet seemed almost perfect. Looking upon the grove, he thought, surely this is the place where my mind will become still. He approached the Buddha and asked for permission to spend the day meditating there. The Buddha, however, was alone at that moment. He asked Meghiya to wait until other monks arrived. The request was simple, yet Meghiya's enthusiasm had already become urgency. Believing the opportunity too precious to delay, he asked again and then once more. Finally, the Buddha replied with calm acceptance. If you think this is the right time, then go. There is something deeply human in this moment. We often believe that the next place, the next routine, the next retreat, or the next change in circumstance will finally bring the peace we seek. The mind quietly tells us that calm exists somewhere else, waiting just beyond our current experience. Like someone chasing the edge of a rainbow, we mistake the landscape for the source of tranquility. When silence becomes loud, Meghiya settled beneath a tree in the mango grove. Everything around him appeared ideal. The air was fresh, the ground was cool. Birds called from distant branches, and the world seemed perfectly arranged for meditation. Yet the moment he turned inward, another landscape appeared. Thoughts of pleasure arose, old memories drifted into awareness. Irritation appeared without clear cause, harsh judgments surfaced unexpectedly. The more he tried to return to stillness, the more the mind wandered into places he had never intended to visit. By evening, he had made no progress. The disappointment must have been profound. Nothing outside had disturbed him. The disturbance had come entirely from within. Many of us know this feeling without ever entering a monastery. We believe that if only our schedule became lighter, our home quieter, or our responsibilities fewer, peace would naturally arrive. Yet when those rare, quiet moments finally appear, we often discover that the greatest noise has been traveling with us all along. A forest may become silent in an instant. The mind rarely does. The arrow and the Fletcher. Meghiya returned and spoke honestly with the Buddha. He described how his meditation had been overwhelmed by restless desires, resentment, and unkind thoughts. He had expected serenity, but encountered only the unpredictable movement of his own mind. The Buddha did not criticize him. Instead, he pointed toward a truth that has remained timeless. The restless mind is difficult to guide, yet the wise train it as a Fletcher straightens an arrow. An arrow maker does not strike the wood into shape with anger. He works patiently, making small adjustments again and again until the shaft flies true. The Buddha's comparison is remarkably compassionate. He does not expect the mind to become steady because we command it to. He expects steadiness to emerge through careful understanding. When a young tree bends in the wind, a gardener does not shout at its branches. He supports it gently until strength grows from within. The mind develops in much the same way. Perhaps we have misunderstood discipline. We often imagine it as force. The Buddha presents it as careful craftsmanship. Real training is less like winning a battle and more like learning an art. The mind that has learned to wander. Why is the mind so difficult to settle? Not because it is broken, because it has spent years practicing movement. Every notification, every comparison, every remembered regret. Every imagined future becomes another path worn into the landscape of attention. Eventually, the mind follows these familiar routes almost automatically. Just as water naturally seeks the channels already carved into the earth. This is why sitting quietly can feel strangely uncomfortable. We are interrupting habits that have been strengthened thousands of times. The mind responds by rushing back toward what feels familiar, even when those familiar patterns create anxiety or exhaustion. The Buddha understood this long before the modern language of conditioning existed. He saw that repeated habits become invisible masters unless they are observed with clarity. Recognition is the beginning of freedom. The moment you notice that the mind has wandered is not a failure of practice. It is the first moment of awakening within that practice. Awareness has quietly returned. Like the first light touching the horizon after a long night. It does not erase the darkness all at once. It simply reveals that morning has already begun. The fish out of water. The Buddha continued with another image, one that is vivid precisely because it is unsettling. As a fish taken from its watery home quivers upon the dry ground, so does the mind tremble when it is drawn away from the world of craving. A fish does not thrash because the earth is cruel. It thrashes because it has lost the environment to which it has become accustomed. The mind behaves in much the same way. When you decide not to reach for your phone at the first hint of boredom, restlessness appears. When you choose not to replay an old argument, the mind searches for another story to feed upon. When silence replaces constant stimulation, a strange discomfort can arise. It is easy to mistake that discomfort for evidence that something is wrong. The Buddha suggests the opposite. The trembling is not a sign that peace is impossible. It is a sign that old habits are losing their unquestioned authority. The mind is discovering that it cannot rely on the familiar currents that have carried it for so long. Like a river changing course after many seasons, the first movement is uneven. Only with time does a new channel become natural. Learning to stay. Many people imagine that inner freedom means never becoming distracted. The Buddha points towards something quieter. Freedom is not measured by how rarely the mind wanders. It is measured by how gently it returns. Each return weakens the illusion that every thought deserves to be followed. Gradually, you begin to notice that thoughts arrive much like birds crossing the sky. Some remain for a moment. Others disappear almost before they are recognized. None of them asks for permission to appear, yet none of them is required to stay. There is a quiet dignity in simply remaining present while this movement unfolds. You begin to see that awareness is wider than the thoughts passing through it. The mind still produces memories, plans, fears, and fantasies. But they no longer define the whole of your experience. A mountain does not become the clouds that drift across its summit. In the same way, awareness need not become every passing thought. This recognition cannot be borrowed from a book. It must be discovered again and again through direct seeing. The invisible weight of desire. The Buddha spoke of the mind's tendency to drift toward pleasant experiences, but his teaching reaches far beyond obvious pleasures. Desire often wears quieter disguises. The desire to be understood. The desire to appear successful. The desire to control how others remember us. The desire to ensure that tomorrow unfolds exactly as we imagine. These movements seem reasonable because they are woven into ordinary life. Yet each carries a hidden condition: I can rest only when this is fulfilled. Without realizing it, the mind postpones peace until the next achievement, the next reassurance, the next certainty. But certainty has always been fragile. The future remains unwritten. Other people remain beautifully beyond our control. Even the person you were yesterday has already disappeared into memory. Holding tightly to what cannot remain still is like trying to grasp flowing water with a closed fist. The tighter the grip, the less there is to hold. The Buddha does not ask you to reject the world. He invites you to notice where grasping quietly turns ordinary living into unnecessary suffering. In that moment of recognition, the hand begins to open by itself. The place where wisdom begins. Thera Meghiya entered the mango grove believing that the perfect place would create the perfect meditation. He returned having discovered something far more valuable. The real work was never hidden among the trees. It was unfolding within the movements of his own mind. This realization marks an important turning point for all of us. We spend much of life improving our surroundings. We organize our homes, refine our schedules, seek healthier relationships, and pursue meaningful work. These efforts have their place. The Buddha never denied the value of wise circumstances. Yet no arrangement of the outer world can permanently quiet an unexamined mind. Sooner or later, every peaceful room fills with thought. Every beautiful landscape becomes familiar. Every long-awaited success gives way to the next expectation. The search outside eventually reaches its limit. The search within has no such boundary because each moment of awareness reveals another layer that was previously unseen. Like a seed resting beneath the soil through winter, understanding often grows long before it becomes visible. Nothing dramatic announces its arrival. One day you simply notice that a thought which once carried you away now passes with surprising ease. Nothing has been forced. Nothing has been suppressed. Something has simply been understood. And in that quiet understanding, the training of the mind has already begun. Seeing without becoming. The Buddha never suggested that wisdom begins when difficult thoughts disappear. Wisdom begins when you stop becoming every thought that appears. The one who watches the river is not carried away by every current. When anger arises, there is usually a brief moment before the story gathers strength. When fear appears, there is a quiet instant before it begins constructing imagined futures. Those moments are easily overlooked because they are so ordinary. Yet they contain an extraordinary possibility. Awareness can notice a thought without stepping inside it. Imagine standing beside a river after heavy rain. Branches, leaves, and broken twigs drift past in the current. You recognize each one, yet you do not feel compelled to jump into the water simply because something has floated by. Thoughts can be met in the same way. They may pass close enough to be seen clearly, but they need not determine where you go. This is not detachment born of indifference. It is intimacy without entanglement. You see the movement of the mind more clearly because you are no longer swept away by every movement it creates. In that simple shift, the restless mind begins to lose its urgency. The space between impulse and action. Many people believe that emotions force our actions. The Buddha observed something subtler. Between what arises and what follows, there is a small space. It may last only a heartbeat. Within that heartbeat lives freedom. Someone speaks harshly. A familiar impulse to defend yourself appears. For years, the response may have been immediate, almost automatic. Words leave the mouth before understanding has a chance to arrive. But awareness changes the rhythm. You notice the tightening in the chest. You feel the heat of irritation. Instead of moving instantly, you remain present for one more breath. Nothing magical happens. The emotion is still there. Yet the mind is no longer completely possessed by it. A single conscious pause can alter the direction of an entire conversation, sometimes even the course of a relationship. Not because you have suppressed your feelings, but because you have seen them before they hardened into action. Like a sailor adjusting the rudder by only a few degrees, the change appears small at first. Over a long voyage, however, it leads to an entirely different shore. The Buddha's training is often like this. Small moments of clear seeing quietly reshape an entire life. Why we keep returning to the same suffering. Have you ever wondered why certain thoughts visit again and again, even after you believe you have resolved them? The Buddha understood that repetition is not always a sign that something has been left unfinished. Sometimes it is simply the echo of long-established habit. The mind prefers what is familiar, even when the familiar brings pain. You may revisit an old disappointment because it has become part of how you understand yourself. You may rehearse imagined conversations because certainty feels safer than uncertainty. You may compare yourself with others because comparison offers the comforting illusion that your place in the world can finally be measured. These habits survive because they promise protection, yet they rarely deliver peace. The Buddha invites us to look beneath the surface of each recurring pattern. Not to ask, why does this thought keep coming back, but rather, what does this thought promise me? Often the promise is simple. Control, approval, security, permanence. When those promises are seen clearly, they begin to loosen their hold. The thought no longer appears as an unquestionable truth. It reveals itself as another attempt by the mind to escape uncertainty. And uncertainty, the Buddha reminds us, is not an enemy. It is simply the nature of life itself. the quiet strength of returning. Patiently returned, the wandering mind becomes its own teacher. There is a temptation in every spiritual practice to look for dramatic transformation. We imagine that wisdom must arrive like lightning illuminating the night. More often, it resembles dawn. The light appears so gradually that you cannot point to the exact moment darkness became morning. Perhaps today you become aware of one unnecessary reaction before speaking. Tomorrow you notice an anxious thought without believing it completely. Weeks later, you realize that a resentment you carried for years no longer feels quite as heavy. None of these moments announces itself with celebration. Yet together they reveal a profound truth. The mind is changing because it is being understood rather than controlled. Thera Meghiya did not fail beneath the mango tree. He discovered the very restlessness that needed to be known. Without that discovery, genuine wisdom could not have begun. Sometimes what feels like failure is simply the first honest meeting with your own mind. The Buddha never measured progress by how peaceful a single meditation session became. He measured it by the gradual flowering of understanding. Like a forest growing one season at a time, the deepest changes are often the quietest. Nothing seems different from one day to the next. Until one day, everything is. The mind that can be trusted. As understanding deepens, something unexpected begins to happen. The mind does not become empty, it becomes trustworthy. Thoughts still arise, emotions still visit, joy comes and goes, sorrow comes and goes. Life continues to change just as the seasons continue their quiet turning. What changes is your relationship with these movements. You no longer feel compelled to believe every fear simply because it is convincing. You no longer chase every pleasant experience as though it could complete you. You no longer resist every uncomfortable moment as though it should never have appeared. The mind gradually becomes a place where experience can unfold without constant interference. Consider an old tree standing through many winters. It bends when the wind is strong. It sheds its leaves when the season calls for it. Yet its roots remain deep within the earth. The Buddha's teaching points toward this kind of steadiness, not rigidity, but stability, not resistance, but balance. A trained mind is not one that never moves. It is one that always knows how to return. Meghiya's real discovery. When Meghiya first entered the mango grove, he believed that peace depended upon finding the perfect place. When he returned to the Buddha, he discovered that the true place of practice had always been much closer. It was every moment in which the wandering mind could be known without resentment. The Buddha's verses were never intended merely to describe the difficulty of controlling the mind. They reveal something far more hopeful. If the mind can be trained, then it is not condemned to remain restless. If habits have been learned, new habits of awareness can also be learned. If confusion can grow through repetition, clarity can grow through repetition as well. The ancient commentaries tell us that after hearing the Buddha's teaching, Meghiya's understanding opened and he entered the stream of awakening. This was not a reward for perfect meditation. It was the fruit of seeing clearly. His disappointment became wisdom because he stopped measuring himself against an imagined ideal and began looking directly at the nature of his own mind. Many of us spend years trying to become a different person. The Buddha gently asks a different question. Can you understand the person who is here now? That question has the power to transform a life. Nothing outside has changed. Freedom belongs to the one who sees clearly, not to the one who controls everything. Perhaps this is the quiet miracle hidden within these verses. When this reflection began, the mind seemed like an untamed force, rushing wherever habit and desire pulled it. Now the landscape feels different. Not because every difficult thought has disappeared. Not because life has become predictable. Not because uncertainty has ended. The difference is far more subtle. You have seen that restlessness is not an enemy to defeat, but a movement to understand. You have seen that awareness is already present each time you recognize that the mind has wandered. You have seen that returning is not failure, but the practice itself. The arrow is not straightened with violence. The fish does not need to be hated for its trembling. The mind does not awaken through force. It awakens through patient seeing. The Buddha never promised a life without change, disappointment, praise, blame, gain, or loss. He offered something more enduring. A way of meeting every changing experience without becoming imprisoned by it. Like a clear lake reflecting the mountains without trying to hold them. The awakened mind allows experience to appear and disappear according to its own nature. Nothing needs to be clung to. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Only seen. And perhaps that is why these verses continue to speak across centuries. The restless mind that troubled Meghiya is the same restless mind that checks one more notification before sleep. Replays yesterday's conversations, worries about tomorrow's uncertainties, and searches endlessly for a place where everything will finally feel complete. The Buddha reminds us that the place we have been searching for is not hidden beyond another achievement or another possession. It begins in this very moment, with the simple willingness to observe instead of react. To understand instead of condemn, and to return instead of despair. Life will continue to unfold as it always has. People will change. Bodies will age. Plans will succeed and fail. Pleasure will visit and depart. Sorrow will do the same. The seasons will continue their endless turning. Yet when the mind is trained through clear seeing, these changes no longer steal your peace quite so easily. Freedom is discovered not by controlling the river of life, but by learning how to stand beside it with wisdom, compassion, and an undisturbed heart. Nothing outside has changed. Yet everything is experienced differently because perception has become clear. This is Buddha Reflections, where philosophy, insight, and lived experience meet to explore mind, impermanence, and release. The conversation doesn't end here. Visit the quiz tab and share your score in the comments. Thanks for your time, it's been a delight. What should we explore next? Comment, share, and save your insight. Subscribe to Orbital Dharma and keep your thoughts bright.